Good morning, everyone. I'm really happy to be with you all today to present an overview of Gerding Edlen's sustainability program with a focus on building performance and data tracking tools. Some of you may be further down this road than us, and some of you may just be getting started. I'd like to share some of our current practices and what we've learned the past few years as we've become more experienced in operationalizing our ESG platform. First, just a little bit about Portland, Oregon, my hometown. Here we have a lot of wonderful nature at our disposal, the proximity of the mountains and the coastal range as well, and then the actual Oregon coast, which is beautiful. And here in town, we have the Willamette River that runs through the middle of the city. And the picture that you're seeing here is a shot looking over toward Mount Hood from the West Hills in Portland. We, like I said, have an abundance of nature. The Pacific Northwest is well known for that. And along with that comes a fair amount. From an ecological standpoint, stormwater management is a really big issue in our area and gets a lot of attention in our sustainability work. Portland is a temperate climate with relatively low humidity and longer shoulder seasons, which allow for ventilation without the need for heating or cooling for good portions of the year. And one thing to just kind of note from this conversation's perspective is that Portland has been at the center of sustainable development since the early 2000s. I think a lot of you know that much creative thinking around sustainability and urban planning and economic development came from that period, from the design and development community, along with the city's economic development agency, the Portland Development Commission, which is now known as Prosper Portland, and Portland State University, where innovative concepts in urban planning and design were being heavily promoted and integrated into the practice of much of what was happening within the city at that time. Let me share a little bit more about Gerding Edlen. We are headquartered in Portland, and we have offices in Boston and San Francisco. During our early years, we were a development firm working with other owners or capitalizing projects with local equity partners. We had separately managed accounts until 2009. When we successfully raised our first green equity fund, despite the economic downturn, and really shifted our focus into becoming a premier investment management firm. Today, we have over 1.2 billion in assets under management. Our portfolio consists primarily of multifamily properties, and most of our assets are outside of Portland. We have a very strong environmental policy, and we're early adopters of LEED. We have been committed to sustainable development since we were established as a firm, and we have a commitment to achieve a minimum of LEED Gold certification across our portfolio. To date, we have developed or recertified over 75 LEED properties, most of which are NC certifications. But we've also recertified some of our LEED properties under version 4 O&M, as Gautam mentioned earlier, and certified several acquired assets that were not previously certified as well. From a performance perspective, our target out of the gate on new construction properties is a minimum 25% reduction in energy and carbon emissions and a 35% reduction in water use. When it comes to our sustainability goals, I think it's important to really talk about our objectives so that you have a sense of where we're coming from when we talk about what does sustainability mean to us. For us, sustainability has always been about much more than just the environmental responsibility component. We see sustainability primarily as about people. It's about making great places for people and the relationship that occupants have with the building. We are laser focused on the overall user experience that results from design, construction, and operational choices that we make. So we ask ourselves, how do we create a high quality live, work, play experience? If we're creating spaces where people can thrive, then those spaces need to promote personal health. They need to provide occupants with a sense of well-being and connection, and they need to demonstrate environmental stewardship. It wasn't until 2010, when we had a portfolio of assets under management, that we really got the opportunity to formulate a strong sustainable operations platform. Since then, we've worked diligently on that to improve and innovate. Our sustainable goals can be categorized in 4 key areas. We strive for market leadership in green building practices and outcomes. We prioritize tenant programming to reinforce our sustainability agenda. We seek partnerships to create positive impacts to the local community beyond the properties themselves. And we track, benchmark, and optimize building performance. This is essential to our ESG platform, but it's also critical in protecting asset value. And that'll be the focus of most of the discussion today. We believe that this approach creates healthier and better performing assets, which creates value for our investors in operations and at disposition. And we believe authentic programming and engagement drives higher tenant retention and brand credibility. I'll walk through the first of these pretty quickly. And like I said, I'd like to focus the conversation mostly on the building performance aspect. We have an established track record as national leaders in green building, and this leadership is demonstrated in a number of ways. We are aligned with green standards such as LEED and Fitwel, and other environmentally responsible frameworks like SAM and SAFE. We incorporate innovative approaches such as biophilic design and resiliency planning into our work. We take inspiration from frameworks like the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and we are signatories to the Principles for Responsible Investment. We've also joined ULI's Greenprint Center for Building Performance, and that group has a goal of achieving carbon reduction emissions of 50% by 2030. And finally, we are a certified B Corp. We've been certified since 2015. And B Corps are for-profit businesses that balance purpose with profit. All of this is with the goal of pushing the market forward and driving meaningful change. Along with that is this idea of being transparent about what we have accomplished and how we are managing risk and integrating ESG into all aspects of our work. So to that end, we publish an annual environmental and community impact report. This is geared toward all of our stakeholders, and you can find our 2019 reports on our website currently. We strive really to create or to communicate these achievements in terms that people can really understand and relate to. And another very important platform for our disclosures on ESG is our participation in the annual GRESB survey. We have performed consistently well, and last year one of our funds earned a top 5-star rating. So we're very excited about that. Resident engagement is a really critical part of our sustainable platform. For us, this is all about promoting behavior change through sustainable lifestyle practices. As I mentioned, most of our portfolio is multifamily, and we've seen that we've been able to transition a lot of these programming components into our commercial buildings with some adjustments, obviously, but it seems to be as beneficial in that context as for creating this continuity of understanding around, what we're trying to accomplish from a sustainable perspective. So we integrate sustainability into all of our social events, and oftentimes it's actually the featured topic. We have a variety of resident programs such as green power purchase options, green dry cleaning, free green cleaning supplies, and expanded recycling, which are offered at all of our properties. We've also had a lot of good success with gamification platforms to encourage behavior change. The Northwest Earth Institute is a nonprofit based here in Portland, which runs an annual eco challenge. And that's always a fun activity that we roll out at all of our properties every year. We curate unique amenities such as farm-to-table food deliveries and free on-site fitness classes. And then we make sure that we incorporate volunteer events and donation drives, which are really great ways to create community connections And we've seen a lot of engagement around that at some of our properties, whether it's a book drive or toys for kids. Those sorts of things tend to really be impactful, not only for the communities, but for resident participation. And community engagement, when it comes to the communities where we do business, we believe we have a responsibility to create positive impacts. To accomplish this, we establish, unique partnerships with our retail tenants and other local businesses, with local artists and with local nonprofits. And, because we've been active in the same markets for over a decade now, we have developed, a lot of extensive knowledge of each of those markets and how to integrate with those specific organizations. So here you'll see a gypsum art piece that's in the public plaza in front of our Zoe apartment building in Oakland. On the left, you see the East Boston Open Market in the lobby of our Eddy Apartments building. And then the other image is the Roof Crop Farm at one of our Chicago properties. We started a partnership with them at that building where they actually grow the produce, and then we extended event programming to other properties in the Chicago market. Okay, so now that we've covered these three areas, let's focus the remainder of the conversation on the building optimization piece. We've spent a lot of time the last few years fine-tuning how we assess the performance of our portfolio. How are we actually benchmarking our performance? And this all begins with utility data collection and analysis, which can be really messy and challenging and also very intriguing and very time-consuming. We use several platforms to collect and interpret data, and each platform has a purpose and provides slightly different insights because they're using different baselines or different comparison data sets. And we'll talk about some of that a little bit later too. So let's go over some of the highlights of our process and what we're learning. From the first ESG report that we issued, we struggled to collect timely and comprehensive performance data across our portfolio. Particularly in our multifamily properties, aggregate electricity consumption data was really difficult to obtain since the tenant meters the tenant units are metered directly and we don't see those bills. Mandatory reporting ordinances have really facilitated this data collection. Utilities are now required to provide aggregate data to landlords so that they can then report it to the local jurisdiction. But this information comes at the end of the year, which doesn't really help us assess performance in a timely or meaningful way. So around 2010, while experimenting with different ways to sort of address this data collection challenge, a lot of new metering technologies were beginning to emerge. So we started looking for a data collection platform that could collect energy and water usage in real time and display it via a user-friendly interface. The system that we are using now is called AquaCore. It's a data management platform that tracks usage in real time. AquaCore has hardware that connects to existing utility meters or non-utility submeters in the building and transmits the data online. The platform does a number of other things. It tracks against our monthly budgets and provides historic trends. It normalizes for weather and helps give our site teams really actionable information. They've been adding different features to it over time. So they've rolled out some really neat features recently around project tracking. And overall, it's just been really helpful in facilitating how we implement building optimization at the property level. Like everything, it's not foolproof. Occasionally, the hardware becomes faulty or a utility meter that it's pulling from starts to malfunction. So to ensure consistency across our platforms, we still cross-reference real-time data that we're collecting with actual utility bill data. The main takeaway here is that data collection and integrity is always a challenge, and you kind of sort of have to live with a little bit of a lingering feeling of, uncertainty around it. But we pretty much feel like we get 90% there, and I think that that's just kind of the name of the game. And then there are also nuances about our portfolio that provide an additional layer of complexity when it comes to interpreting the performance data. For example, our multifamily properties have anywhere from a 6-month to a year lease-up period. So establishing a reliable baseline performance trend can't really happen until the building achieves stabilized operations. We rely on data from comparable properties to inform our expectations for year one, and then focus during this period on tracking house meter loads and understanding those usage patterns. Also, at our multifamily properties, as I mentioned, we have no control over tenant loads, which means that our ability to influence tenant behavior becomes an important lever in managing our utility consumption. We lean on engagement platforms to encourage conservation, but ultimately, we can only control the loads associated with the house meter. Our data has shown anywhere from a 60-40 split between the house and apartment load to something like 15 to 85, depending on system type, season, and with COVID. So in more recent months where we have had shelter in place and building usage has gone up significantly because people are home in their units, we've seen a decrease on our house meter, so down to something like as low as that 15%. And we've seen tenant loads comprise up to 85% of the building's usage. So very interesting trends to observe as we go from normal operations to shelter in place to this slow transition to back to work. Let's see. And we, as we're still observing that a lot of people are working from home still in our buildings. And so this sort of profile is what we are seeing more currently. So once we had a reliable data collection platform, we set about fine-tuning our operational targets. In order to optimize our building performance, minimize operating expenses, and create engagement in this optimization process with our teams, we wanted to set specific monthly performance targets for electricity and gas consumption at each asset. So that said, the question then becomes, well, what are you comparing to and what performance standard should be used for benchmarking? So we spent some time kind of tossing that around. In the annual business plan for each asset, we articulate the environmental and community impact targets that we want to achieve, and we include specific performance targets for energy, carbon, water, waste, and either an percent improvement over the baseline or an incremental improvement over prior year performance, depending on the asset. In order to determine the specific therm and kilowatt hour values to track toward, we had to establish a consistent baseline to apply. So back in 2018, we began using the median energy use for similar buildings in similar climate zones as derived from Portfolio Manager as the baseline for our benchmarking across our properties. And this was for both new construction properties and our acquired operational assets. The median energy use for similar buildings in similar climate zones equates to an Energy Star score of 50. From there, we determined an appropriate methodology to calculate the required monthly kilowatt hour and therm values for each property to achieve that 50 Energy Star score, and then set specific improvement targets from that baseline. So what you see here is a graph showing how we're starting to trend this internally. We have collected data monthly for electricity and gas, and we're trending it against our performance target, which is the lines that you see there, and looking to the right, comparing it to prior year performance. And so this has been really a great exercise. As I said, we've had more and more data at our disposal with our real-time platform. Since 2010, across our green equity portfolios, we have achieved between a 21 to 31% reduction in energy use and carbon emissions, and an 18 to 26% reduction in water use. So we're finding that we have done really well in some respects, but also need to challenge ourselves to really hit the performance targets and maintain those. It's one thing to design to a certain performance level, but really the proof is in the pudding. We have to get there during operations. And as I said, because we have a largely multifamily portfolio and we are dealing with elements of building usage that we can't control directly, that does become more challenging. So overall energy savings relative to a benchmark is still a very important metric for us, but we're also paying close attention to year-over-year trends at each property and starting to focus more on like-for-like analysis at the portfolio level. Waste has been more difficult to track. In most of our markets, we have accounts with waste management and we do receive reports. And there we typically see something around a 25% diversion rate, but we have seen much higher diversion rates as we have been in COVID. And that's been interesting to observe. And we're trying to understand that better so that we can keep that trend going as time goes on. In order to optimize building performance, we collect data, as I've talked about, but we also need to evaluate and recalibrate our building systems regularly. So a key part of our optimization strategy is to follow a formal retro commissioning process. Building controls are complicated and, settings get changed by service technicians or site staff for any number of reasons, and oftentimes without consideration for the impacts to overall energy efficiency. So retro commissioning focuses on low to no cost adjustments to building controls and equipment to ensure maximum operational efficiency. We have seen some great results over the past 5 years from some projects that we've done across our portfolio. Since we build our new buildings with high performance systems and high energy efficiency targets, retro commissioning tends to be more impactful for our acquired assets, but we have seen some benefits even with some of our newer properties. Most utilities offer some level of financial incentive to support this work. Sometimes it's a cost share agreement, or they may even cover the consultant's audit work 100%. So here are a few examples of some retro commissioning projects that we've done in recent years. In 2017, we went through a very big retro commissioning effort with a large all-electric commercial office building. This building was already operating with an Energy Star score in the low 90s, but we were still able to find fairly large annual energy savings through mostly equipment programming changes, pretty simple stuff. And the verification requirement that some utility programs have as a component of retro commissioning, sometimes, it's a very valuable piece to have that verification requirement built in, but sometimes when we've gone through the verification, we've seen even higher savings than were predicted. So you can see here for the Chicago property, the amount of savings that we achieved. For a multifamily Chicago property in 2018, that one was part of our LEED certification under O&M, version 4 O&M. And it was a wonderful project where we really saw a great financial return on the investments that we made. Similarly, another multifamily property in Chicago. This one was a new construction property that hadn't been stabilized I think it had been stabilized for about 18 months. And you can see that we were still able to get some savings, but more it was a kind of a confirmation, a reassurance that things were operating well. And since it was a zero cost effort, we found that very valuable. And then finally, in our Boston property, we were seeing some unusual cycling patterns and higher than typical demand loads. And so we looked into this carefully and with the help of a consultant who focuses on retro commissioning, made some adjustments to the cooling tower and the garage heaters, which really helped to get a handle on that peak demand. And that peak demand is such a big part of your utility cost that it had a really significant savings associated with it. So, that becomes really important. We can apply a cap rate to those operational cost savings and then really see a direct impact to building value. So there is a lot of benefit to be had from this type of building optimization management. And I think it's really important to integrate this systematically into your operational platform. The next two slides are focused on other data analytic platforms that we have access to, and we're working to leverage them more fully in our day-to-day operations. Here is a slide from Measurable. Measurable is a software tool that we use to complete our annual GRESB survey. I'm sure that some of you are familiar with the survey. GRESB, Global Real Estate Sustainability Benchmark, looks at management and policy, the implementation of those policies, and building performance. So it's a mix of a lot of qualitative narratives around how you function, how ESG is integrated into your practices, and it also focuses on actual performance data. So the Measurable platform aggregates all of that data and presents it in the appropriate way. An interesting aspect of the Measurable platform is that it compares our performance to that of other users in their platform. So that gives us another reference point on how we really measure up. We also are scored in our GRESB survey. We also are scored, globally with respect to our ESG practices as a whole. But this platform really lets us see how we measure up to other GRESB participants who are using Measurable for their survey. GRESB compares, like I said, to a peer data set based on geography and product type. And while they are looking for year-over-year improvements on a like-for-like basis within the survey, they also give a majority of points within the survey for data coverage. So this is another way in which having a real-time monitoring tool in place allows us to demonstrate that we have data coverage over all of our portfolio. We are beginning to use ARC more as an optimization tool and not only as a certification platform, but we're still sort of in the early phases of this. We have certified 6 properties through some iteration of version 4 O&M with ARC. 2 were previously certified office properties, 2 previously certified multifamily properties, and 2 acquired multifamily assets that were not certified previously. So we've kind of been through it in a lot of different contexts, and we've gained a lot of knowledge around what's required to be successful in those efforts. We're learning a lot of nuances also around the scoring and how properties compare from ARC to Portfolio Manager to Measurable. This screenshot shows properties in one of our funds and sort of where they sit in the overall process. Our current focus is to ensure that even though new construction properties that do not need to recertify yet, that they're implementing the same strategies as properties that do certify, from the air quality testing to the tenant surveys. We really want to have consistency across our portfolio within this platform. Especially now in light of COVID and the heightened awareness around health, we want to look at expanding our air quality testing to potentially include additional contaminants. So it's important to note that both Measurable and ARC are pulling the monthly utility data from Portfolio Manager. That's like the clearinghouse for all of it, right? And so we know there's alignment between all 3 of these data management platforms. And from a data management standpoint, it's important to reconcile real-time performance data with discrepancies in utility billing to make sure that the data that is populated in Portfolio Manager is reliable and complete, so that as it feeds to all of these platforms and starts to give us insight through the analytics that these platforms provide, we are most effectively managing the cost and then the environmental impacts of our portfolio. So with that concludes my presentation. I want to thank you for your time, and I hope that this was helpful.